So is scattering enemies objectively bad or good in Guild Wars 1? And does this change or shape the metagame in a way where skills that cause scatter just should be dismissed wholesale or should just be avoided at all costs? So when we're talking about the metagame or what's optimal in Guild Wars 1, it's all related to what you're doing. If you are speed clearing with human players, like a full team of human players, the builds you're going to be running are going to be drastically different from builds, for example, that you would be running if you were doing general vanquishing or, specific farms or whatever. So based on what you are doing in the game is going to drastically change what is effective and what is not. In some speed clears, Vow of Strength Dervish is the best thing. In some speed clears, Mesmer is the best thing. In some speed clears, Ranger is the best thing. I have the North dungeons, but I know there's a dungeon where everyone spams Ranger, and that's like a real thing. So depending on the content you're doing, and if you're using heroes or not, if you're using cons or not, depending on how you're playing the game, what content you're doing, things will be better or worse. For me personally, I only really do like factions and Nightfall hard mode stuff and like Winds of Change for the most part. So I found like Fire Magic to be really effective there. Even in just like a factions only run where I had only like a factions only account and all I was allowed to use were factions and core skills for the playthrough, I beat all of Winds of Change, except for the final confrontation. I also had a second rule where I was only allowed to use one of each profession. That's really what did me in. But the factions only bars were kind of crazy. So that being aside, or putting that aside, I'm going to go over the reasons why scatter is good and why it's bad. Because there's definitely a downside to scatter. And if you mitigate its downside, I would say the upside is huge. So what is the upside of skills that cause scatter? Generally, it's big damage. So Firestorm, for example, deals... Actually, what's my stats? 37? Okay. So in this case, Firestorm would deal 370 damage against 60 armor, which a lot of backline enemies in hard mode do have 60 armor. Monks, Necros, Mesmers, Ellies, Writs. Most of the game has 60 armor. The things that Fire Magic is bad against are generally like Paragons, Rangers, Warriors. Assassins, it can be okay, but like melee units kind of run around haphazardly, so it's not the best thing against those. But you would have something else deal with that. Fire Magic generally is used against enemy casters. It's mainly used to nuke down enemy backlines. That's the whole point to Fire Magic. So now that we've established that, let's go over why Scatter is bad. Scatter is bad because it can trigger over aggro. The way it triggers over aggro is, let's say I'm an enemy, right? And I'm scattering. I scatter, great. And then let's say there's another enemy here that's a healer. The enemy healer from this is group 1, this is group 2. The healer from group 2 moves up and heals me. And then I start to attack back. Then the healer continues to move up. And now, once that healer has healed group 1, group 2 now has access to my position, and then they'll push me, and I'll over aggro. And this is bad. Objectively, this is bad. So this is like the worst case scenario for scatter backfiring, where you over aggro by pulling an enemy healer that wasn't part of the fight into the fight. That is objectively bad. I'm not gonna argue against that. Okay, another thing they can do: enemies can unball or spread out. So you have a ball of enemies. Let's say they scatter, they start to spread out, and now they're no longer in a ball for you to nuke down with AoE. That's bad, definitely, for sure. And then another reason why scatter is bad: enemies may not take full damage from the AoEs, and they might move out of them. That's like not one of the worst things, but you're not getting your full damage. That sucks. All right, so let's go over why scatter is good. And then I'm going to do like a little quick demo. So enemies can be CC'd while being damaged from the AoEs, right? So like if you use Binding Chains, if you use Churning Earth against hard mode enemies, if you use Deep Freeze with Auspicious Incantation on Mesmer is exceptionally good because it actually profits the Mesmer energy and it lasts for 10 seconds no matter what. It's an area hex, so it's not going to get removed. Like maybe it gets removed from like 1 or 2 enemies because there isn't really AoE hex removal aside from like one obscure skill, but it's pretty good. And then it also profits with Auspicious, and you also have things like Psychic Instability. So to support a team spamming AoEs, you would need skills like this, right, to mitigate its downside. But when enemies are stuck in a Savannah Heat, 60 armor enemies take 300 damage nearby from a single spell. That's pretty good. So like there's definitely an upside, right? And obviously it's not going to be as fast as, you know, being a Paragon running Heroic Refrain or whatever the hell, running Mesmer Way. That's probably going to burst things down a little bit more efficiently just because it's just consistent nearby armor ignoring damage. But I think there are some team comps that, you know, you could run with heroes that could make use of some Ellie builds, like Starburst, Shockwave, Savannah Heat. I think there's some team comps that could be built around these skills. And I think that's, like, there's some potential for some, like, hero metagame to be changed, not player metagame. Player metagame, I think, is pretty min-maxed. Maybe there's some things in there that can still be discovered. But I think for the hero metagame, Ellie should be a little bit higher than it is currently. Like on PVX Wiki, 100 Blades and Vow of Strength are considered general meta PvE builds for general gameplay, not even for speed clears where everything is balled up perfectly by assassins and shit. For like, you're just playing hard mode, 100 Blades is good. But it's not though. Because if you actually run 100 Blades on a casual Vanquish where things aren't balled up, the damage output is terrible. Like a Fire Ellie definitely outdamages it. So it's kind of crazy that there's all these builds that are just accepted as good because they don't cause scatter, but then any build that could cause scatter is generally considered bad, or in general, Ellie is considered like a mediocre class for damage, even though its damage is quite crazy. Now, I play a lot of Ellie and Mesmer. Those are my two main classes. I play those the most, so I'm fully aware of how much damage output Mesmer has and how much damage output Ellie has in different zones, the pros and cons of each. As a player playing Mesmer, it can be hard to interrupt with Cry of Frustration when you have a bunch of other Mesmers doing the same thing, because your target probably is going to get interrupted before you have enough time to react to it using a skill, because the AI can interrupt so fast it's ridiculous. So usually players just, I think, echo Energy Surge and just spam Energy Surge. They don't even go for interrupts. But I tend to play more Overload, Cry of Frustration, Psychic Instability Mesmer as the player. I enjoy that the most. But I'm not like some Ellie main who's like, Ellie is the best class. Like, I know, like, I play everything, but those are the two things I play the most. I also play a lot of Ret. Alright, so why Scatter is good. So snared enemies will attempt to flee, but take most of the damage from the AoE and do nothing while slowly walking away. This is the best case scenario. If you can get a big snare on enemies and they just attempt to flee an AoE spell, and the snare is so heavy they can't escape, they're still taking the damage, they're also shut down. So you get the best of both worlds where they're taking damage and they're shut down. That's exactly what Mesmer Way does. You know, the Mistrust and the Cry of Frustration spam gets you your shutdown while also getting you armor ignoring damage. The same thing is true for Savannah Heat plus like Binding Chains, right? Like if they try to flee Savannah Heat, they'll move too slow with Binding Chains, they won't be able to escape. Same idea, right? Shutdown and KD can be used to keep foes in high damage AoE spells, killing them quickly. Okay, so let's talk about general things about Scatter, and then we'll just do this little demo. Scattering occurs generally when enemies take 3 to 4 hits, but not always. Generally. Sometimes they never scatter. I've used Firestorm in enemy backlines, and they literally never scatter. It's not clear as to why this happens. It seems to be the case that in some instances, if an enemy is using a skill, like casting a spell, when it would scatter, sometimes it won't, right? Now, if you throw down like 5 AoEs, sometimes enemies will literally cancel a skill and escape. So that's another thing too. But if they can't escape, then they just die. So that's like the upside, right? Like if you have 2 or 3 Savannah Heats on an enemy backline and they have 60 armor in hard mode, that's 900 damage in 5 seconds. So if they just get knocked down by like Psychic Instability and that, they're dead. They're all dead, right? So there is an upside. I want to make team comps around this. This is something I'm going to be doing in future videos. This is kind of like to kickstart it. All right, so let's do this. Let's get these boys frozen. Let's see. All right, so they've been knocked down in that. So they literally can't scatter right now, even if they wanted to. They've just been knocked down. So here's the upside of Scatter, in that when it doesn't happen at all and you have control over the enemies with shutdown, they're dead. They just get stuck in AoEs like these guys did, and they're mega fucked. Like that's what you want, right? Like I'm in agreement with players that Scatter generally is bad. However, if you can negate the scatter, if you can prevent it from happening, then there's no downside, right? Then the upside is that you just get insane damage and they just die. Like a single Ellie, there's none of these have damage. These are just like, Prot, ST. This doesn't have literally any damage aside from Deep Freeze. So I did all that damage, just a single Ellie in hard mode. All right, let's try against. Let's do this. So he's gonna scatter. So we're gonna anticipate that. All right, actually didn't. He took full damage. He took all procs. All right, now I can throw Churning down on him. He's using Primal Rage, which I like because it's gonna hurt him. All right, he's scattered into that. Body block him. He's dead. And they're dead. And that was a melee unit. He did use Primal Rage. He died a little bit faster. But I wouldn't be... This build would be for the backline. And then I'd have something, Ineptitude, Shockwave, whatever. Something else. A different build. But Fire Magic is kind of like Domination Magic in that it has Shutdown and Damage. It's not as good of Shutdown as Domination Magic. However, in certain instances, it's kind of similar. If you can get things snared in a Savannah Heat and they try to escape it, they will literally walk for 3 seconds doing nothing while taking massive damage. And that can be hard to demo because, like, the Psychic Instability, the Deep Freeze, they're going to be shut down sufficiently for the most part. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the scatter video. I would say for the Domination versus Fire Magic thing, it's this. Domination has better shutdown. Fire Magic on the average has better damage. In the instances in which Domination has better damage, the enemies have extremely high armor, like over 100, like 120 armor, we're talking, like every enemy does. There's like no targets for you. In that case, yeah, Dom is way better. Or they're like fire-resistant enemies. You could run Winter. Most fire-resistant enemies have a weakness to cold damage. Winter converts all elemental damage into cold damage. So if you throw down Winter and then start nuking things with fire, you're actually going to deal increased damage or be targeting like, 80 armor, and then you hit them with cracked armor, they're at 60 armor. Most enemies that have like high fire resistance tend to have like 80 like cold armor, but like 120 to 150, maybe 160 fire armor. So you target that 80 cold armor with cracked armor, you're now hitting base 60 armor. So like Winter helps mitigate that issue. But honestly, I've pressed people on this. I've been like, okay, where is what areas are you doing where there's these fire resistant enemies? And they're like, oh, Ring of Fire. I'm like, well, what content are you doing specifically? Like, why are you in the Ring of Fire? Are you farming? Are you speed clearing? Are you just doing a Vanquish in the Ring of Fire? Like it's never obvious. Like maybe there's some dungeon where there's a fire resistant enemy, but Winter solves the problem. Here, let's get these boys going. See if we can get this off. Oh, they got Psychic Instability in that. Oh, it's so brutal. Oh, cool, I got a gold. Oh, it's not even max though. Come on, man. Give me these max golds. Yo, look at this dude. Psychic Instability is ridiculous. We'll ID the staff, but it's even if it has a perfect mod, it's a junk skin plus. What the fuck? What? Dude, what are the odds? Oh, let me leave here. What are the odds of getting two 19% Eerie stabs? That's so funny. They're both 19% Eerie staffs. I've never seen 2 golds of the exact same skin drop in a row like that, just randomly with heroes, which reduces my chance of getting drops. That's funny. But my point is this. If there are enemies that are resistant to fire magic, you can use Ebon Battle Standard, which makes all of your AoEs hit for plus 15 armor ignoring damage. So even if you're dealing like 30 to 50% of listed damage, you're still dealing plus 15. It still adds up. Like Firestorm does 150 with Battle Standard just from the armor ignoring. So it's still substantial damage, and it will still outdamage a Mesmer. And if you use Winter, it's still outdamage a Mesmer. Now, the outdamaging a Mesmer thing, I've damage tested Mesmer. I play Mesmer a lot. I'm not just like some Ellie main who like hates Mesmer. Like I literally like playing Interrupt Mesmer. It's one of my favorite things to play in the game. So I'm literally like an Ellie Mesmer main. So I'm not coming at this from a position of like, oh, Mesmer sucks. It's people are just overhyping Mesmer. But if you actually damage test a single Mesmer, it's not as much damage as you think. Like, even if you just go to Master of Damage and get, like, if you Arcane Echo and Arcane Mimicry, whatever, Mimicry, E-Surge, and just use E-Surge 3 times in a row, and then use a Natural Signet and Spiritual Pain, and then slash Bow, you're dealing, like, 50 damage per second. Because you don't have damage compression. You don't have... Like, if I have something stuck in a Savannah Heat and a Firestorm, this is, like, 700 damage between 2 spells. That entire enemy backline, if they get knocked down into that, they're fucking dead. If I have Meteor as well, like what I could do, if I wanted to like run something like this, I could run Meteor if I wanted. This is my factions only account, so I don't have that many skills on it. I just bought all the games for it though. But if you Meteor on the tail end of a Psychic Instability, that's a lot of knockdown. That's knockdown for 6 seconds. If you have Earthbind as well, like if I take my ST, and if I drop... This is kind of a weird ST build. Some Spirit Transfer. That's a little suspect. If I bring like Earthbind, and I have a bunch of KD spam outside of Psychic Instability, that adds up. Like that's 3-second knockdowns for everything. So if I have like I could make this like a Stolen Speed Mesmer with like Earthquake or Dragon Stomp. And like Stolen Speed halves the casting time, so you're looking at 1.5 second Dragon Stomp, which is a 3 with Earthbind, a 3-second nearby knockdown. That's so oppressive, like for enemies to deal with. Just like immediately nearby enemy gets knocked down at range. That's ridiculous. Plus the Stolen Speed halves their casting time. So like there's some things there's some shit that can be done with Ellie that I think isn't done because. I think a lot of players don't actually play Ellie, or they just run meta builds and don't experiment a ton. Maybe they do, but I don't think that's the case because like some of the meta builds are really suspicious on like PVX for general PvE meta and other things that are obvious. Like Savannah Heat, like seems really good. Like even a bar like this, you have spam damage, knockdown adjacent. This is 15-second cooldown. This is pretty spammable. With Psychic Instability and Meteor, you're looking at adjacent burn plus good damage. 20-second cooldown isn't that bad. 25 isn't that bad. You could drop Churning for something else. But you could like drop this and run like 2 wards. Ebon Battle Standard. I don't have it on this account yet, but you could get Battle Standard for damage, and then you can get the Wisdom Ward so that 60% of the time your spells have half cooldown. So, and then if you run a 40-40 with that, you're looking at extremely fast casting, especially with Stolen Speed. Like, I think there's some shit we can do with Ellie that would push it up to be insane with heroes that just isn't done. And I'm also going to do some other stuff too. I'm going to experiment with like pet teams and minion teams and some other stuff. So I'm not just going to be doing Ellie stuff, but I'm going to be doing a bunch of videos where I experiment with different things and try to come up with team comps. But I think like 3 Savannah Heat Ellies plus like an Earth Ellie or like maybe a Mesmer with something like this. Maybe it also has like Cry because this one's already spec'd into Dom, so maybe something like, you know, standard shit. Maybe we could get away with Chaos Storm because if it's using Psychic Instability. The only thing that sucks though is like when you give it all these other spells, it doesn't prioritize Psychic Instability, so you might have to like manually cast it sometimes, which I actually am fine with. But like something like this, maybe a BIP. Maybe you don't need a BIP. This is standard. I mean, these are standard. But you could probably get away with Chaos Storm if you have knockdown spam. And Chaos Storm, you know, 220 in this case. Armor ignoring damage over 10 seconds is pretty decent. Comes out fast, Mesmer casts fast, so could throw an overload too. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Just wanted to talk about scatter. The ways to mitigate it. When it's mitigated, I think it's like a non-factor. Like once you have like Psychic Instability and knockdown spam, like you don't have to worry about scatter for the most part. Sometimes it'll still happen, but the upside of getting enemies stuck in these high damage spells is insane. And I think it's nothing to throw out completely, because that's kind of the mindset, right? Like most people are just like, oh, Ellie's AoEs are bad because they cause scatter. But I don't think that's the case. I think they're actually really good and they're undervalued in the metagame because there's like this notion that, oh, because we've done speed clears and we use E-Surge. E-Surge is the best thing and forget everything else. But like when doing Winds of Change with heroes and not using cons and shit, E-Surge will kill things quickly, but if you over aggro, that team comp wipes. It's high risk, high reward. It's like the entire team comp is a glass cannon. If you aggro two groups and they start to spread out and there's like all these melee attacking different things and the enemies are getting spells off, like E-Surge falls apart really quickly. And I've personally helped people doing Winds of Change, even in normal mode, running like the 6 Mesmer team with the builds and everything, and like ST and BIP. You know, you have your ST, your BIP, your Ineptitude, sometimes a Panic, but the rest is just E-Surge. They were running the build, but they were doing a mission where it's really easy to over aggro. So like this notion that Mesmer can just like breeze through everything rapidly, like it can with extreme coordination in players. But if you're just playing generically and you're doing difficult hard mode content, you still need to be careful. So like you can't just like rush around and kill everything. And I also think that AoE is pretty good still. But I think there's some team comps to be discovered that use Firestorm and Savannah Heat with Ebon Battle Standard and the Wisdom Standard. And if you can get your AI to stay in it while casting, then they get damage increase plus cooldown reduction. And this also affects your Mesmers. So like your Mesmers will get the cooldown reduction, but they won't get the damage increase. So like the Battle Standard does not increase Mesmer damage. It increases things that are armor respecting. So the fact that it does that, and you have all these AoE spells that hit nearby and adjacent and shit. So like I could run Searing Heat too. That's another, if I wanted something else. This is another nearby. So these are both nearby. But these are pretty good spells that deal pretty good damage. This is 200 damage if it hits everything, plus 3-second burn. That's pretty good. And this is 300 damage. So there's some potential there. That's all I wanted to say. But yeah, I don't think we should just write off AoE. And just because scatter exists, I'm mitigating scatter with here, let's actually, literally just this. Scatter is being mitigated by a metagame skill. This is used in builds. This is a great skill. This is a fantastic shutdown skill. Probably on par with Panic. I prefer this to Panic because I prefer things being knocked down. I would rather enemies be unable to do anything for 4 seconds than still be able to get some skills off and just interrupt each other. Because like if I catch enemies early with this, I can knock down like their melee and shit with it. And that's why, like when they're balled up, so that's why I prefer this. But one skill solves the problem. So imagine having at least like 2 to 3 utility skills that also contribute to your damage and your shutdown. Like there's definitely team comps to be made around, you know, fire magic that would be viable and you as the player could run it. And if you run the what is it, the Eye of the North wards or whatever, the Ebon Battle Standard and the Wisdom ward, you're looking at serious damage that could potentially do DOA in hard mode, which is what the end goal will be. So I'll try to comp a team that has like a bunch of Ellies that makes use of that for hard mode DOA. I think that'd be fun. But that's it for now. Definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I'm going to be doing a bunch of fun videos where I come up with ridiculous team comps, like, you know, all fire Ellies, all earth Ellies, pet builds, you know, everyone is using glaive and shit like that. Like, just like stupid with heroes, not players, no coordination, just heroes. Like, I was thinking of one where it's just like everyone just shadow steps in and uses like shockwave. There's like 2 shockwavers and then starbursters, and it'd all be heroes, and then everyone just shadow steps in and just bursts. It'd probably be really risky and stupid, but we're gonna come up with some stupid team comps. It'll be fun to do. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.